Grace and greetings to everyone who is joining us online. Blessing to be with you for another time of table talk. I should have mentioned to all of those sitting out in the congregation that Jen is out camping and my wife is in South Carolina, so there are seats up here if you'd like to fill in. Don't worry, Pastor Thomas will not shout at you too much. We are continuing as we go through the scriptures. We've come to the book of Judges. And we said when we wrapped up last week that we would take a look at Deborah and at Gideon. So, let's start with that. We start with Deborah. What jumped out at you? What was a blessing? What raises questions? What can you tell me about Deborah?
Some commentaries think she was the fifth judge or was it the fourth judge? Somebody will say she was the fourth judge.
Oh boy.
She was the fifth judge.
I would have to look at, I don't know it off the top of my head. Let's see.
I was looking at it, had one commentary had Deborah's resume. She was the only female judge. She was a warrior. She was a prophet. She was a poet, a prophetess, a singer, and a songwriter.
I will agree with all of that.
And was she a wife? She was a wife?
Yeah, she was married.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would disagree on the one I'm looking at. That is saying Othniel is the first judge. Well, no, I would go with that. That's true. And then Ehud, Shamgar is very quick, and then Deborah. So that would make Deborah the fourth. I don't know where they're getting the fifth from unless they're saying that in Judges it tells the story later that happened earlier. If that's the case, I'm not aware of it. But that's an interesting question because most people, when you talk about the judges, it's not at the beginning where there's the debate or the error seems like kind of a harsh word, but it's at the end when it's identifying the last judge. And most folks, when you look at the end of Judges, let me see, so ultimately,
Samuel was the last judge.
yeah, that's the answer, is that Samuel is technically the last judge.
Yeah.
Most people are looking at like Micah, and then you get into the whole crazy passages there that most people struggle with, and understandably so. There's some the concubine and all of that, which there's a lot of depth to that we can talk about if you want to go to that. But yeah, a lot of people don't realize the last judge was Samuel. And interestingly, he anoints the first king of Israel and then the subsequent king of Israel. And that's pretty awesome. But let's say for argument's sake, Deborah's number 4.
Yeah.
And I think it goes without saying, I love to point to Deborah because, when you're talking about how Scripture views the role of women and things of that nature, she's a judge, she's a prophetess, she's a military leader, and she's getting it done. There's no doubt about it. And there's even one point where Barak, whose name is a play on the word blessing, she says, hey, go to battle. And he says, I'm not going if you're not with me. Yeah. That kind of tells you something about her, right?
Yeah.
So what do we see in the story of Deborah? Do you have a Deborah in your life? Somebody that's not necessarily what the kids call the ride or die, but someone who you're like, all right, if we're going to do this, you got to be with me. I'll go if you're with me. Right? You ever do that when you were younger and you went on a roller coaster and you're like, I'll ride it if you'll ride it with me.
All the time, yeah.
You always had that person. Deborah's kind of that person for Barak. She's enabling him. Hey, let's realize he ends up in the Hall of Faith for what he does. But what is it that gives him the confidence to do what God has called him to do? It is knowing the prophetess is there. And why do you think that is? Do you think he's just comforted by her presence? Does she have some remarkable peace-giving aura?
Well, she was a prophetess, so he already, knew that she knew what was coming, so he had great faith in her,
Yeah. If I'm going to go into battle against the odds like that, and I know that there's someone who is hearing from the Spirit of God,
Yeah, right here.
guess who I want right beside me as my number one advisor? Right? Think about when Elisha gets surrounded. The reason he gets surrounded, and we have the famous, God open my servant's eyes that he may see there's more for us than against us, and the chariots of fire and all of that. The whole thing leading up to that was the enemy keeps planning to attack the people of God, and Elisha walks in and says, hey, the enemy's going to attack. They're amassing their army over here. They're going to come this way and they're going to do that. And so Israel would go out and wait for him and ambush him. And then they draw up another battle plan, and Elisha does the same thing. And finally the king is, for the enemy, is like, who's the traitor who keeps telling them what we're going to do? There's no way that they could ambush us like this. And they say, there's not a traitor. They have a prophet who keeps revealing, right? That's Deborah. But beyond the idea of phenomenal prophetess, has God on speed dial, that says something about her anointing, her character, and her calling, right? She doesn't have that by chance or by accident. And kudos to Barak for recognizing it.
Yeah.
In a very patriarchal society, as the leader of the army, he could have said, I don't need you telling me what I'm going to do. I know how to lead an army. I know how to fight a battle.
And she was a woman at that.
Yeah.
Plus, too, he didn't even.
Yeah, sit down and be quiet, right?
Yeah, he waited for her to tell him when to go.
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine he's fought wars before, battled before. He knows how to command his troops.
Sure.
So to relinquish that authority to her says a lot.
Yeah. And I mean, we look at this from the contemporary day and a walk of faith, and wow, you got to have a Deborah on your side, someone that you can hear from God and you can trust. For him, he could be removed as the commander. He could lose the respect of his army. Because, like you said, they're going to say, what are you doing listening to a woman?
Yeah.
What does a woman know about this? She's never been to war. She's never led troops. Be a man. Right? They're in a patriarchal society. So he's bucking the customs. He's doing something that could conceivably cost him dearly, but doesn't it also say something of his troops that they're like, well, if he's saying he ain't going without her, there must be something about her, right? So you see how that's how it should be, that people recognize, okay, all of the cultural norms and all of the things that we've come to understand, all of that means nothing if the Spirit of God is on someone. Because the Spirit of God can act through whom he chooses.
Yeah.
And for us to say, well, I've never seen it that way, so it must not be God. Well, or I don't think God would use someone like, well, careful. Because that's exactly what God will do. Right?
I think she's also an inspiration to other women, right? because you have JL who will go and kill Sisera. So it's like, hey, she's empowering other women as well, right? So it's like she's an inspiration in empowering them to do what's righteous and to do what's right.
That's a good point. So think about her for a moment. JL. What a remarkable situation there. What does it say about her?
You went and killed the king.
Yeah, but how does it describe her? Where is she from? She's a Kenite.
She's the wife of Heber the Kenite.
So the Kenites were in the northern Negev in ancient Israel. So the interesting thing is, does anyone know where the Kenites really get their start in Scripture? Jethro. So you see where this starts coming into play. You've got a generation there. Jethro was very quick to give wisdom, but now JL is very quick to observe God's wisdom and see what Deborah's doing, right? Because it makes her act. By the way, I'm just going to give you this one for free. Based on the book we're reading in the book study, the name JL means ibex. Do you guys remember seeing ibex in Israel?
Just the picture, I think. We didn't actually see one,
Okay.
did we?
I
don't think
did.
so.
The little mountain goats
Oh, yes.
that
Oh, yeah.
are sure-footed, hinds feet.
That's what they're called.
Ibex.
That's her name. That's what JL means. Okay, so it's an interesting background fodder, but let's talk about her for a moment. The Kenites actually have a peace between them and Jabin, the king of Hazor, which shows you the kingdom is not doing so well. They're doing things they ought not to do. Remember, with the judges, that's the cycle. They'll fall into sin, they'll be oppressed, they'll cry out to God, God will send a judge. God delivers them, everything's good, the judge dies, they fall right back into it. Well, in this case, some of the people have made peace treaties with the enemy and are cohabitating with them. And her people are among them. So Sisera shows up, and what does she tell him?
She invites him into her tent.
She invites him into the tent. What does she call him?
Master.
Master. Says, don't be afraid. Covers him with a rug. Lets him feel all safe and secure. He says, give me a little water to drink. No doubt, he's in the middle of a battle, right? He's dying of thirst. What does she give him?
Milk.
Milk. Because that's a rarity, and she's honoring him. She's giving him even better than water. She's treating him like royalty. She's hiding him, but it's all a ruse. Now, there's some that have debates on whether what she does is ethical. I think it's absolutely ethical. Because this guy's out killing the people of God without recourse. But notice what she does. It's interesting because Sisera is a deceiver. And you know what she does?
She deceives
She deceives him. And what's he do? He goes to sleep. Here's the thing. she can't fight him one-on-one. So she has to get him asleep. He's not going to go to sleep if he doesn't trust her. So we see kind of a similar thing to Rahab here, right? Maybe she even knows that story. We're not long past Joshua here. So you better believe Israelites are very familiar with the story of Rahab. So there's another person she's learning from. And here's the interesting thing. When he falls asleep, she takes a tent peg, drives it through his temple into the ground. And then as the men are going by the army, she says, hey, he's in here, right? Notice this one woman does what 10,000 soldiers could not.
Yeah.
And that shows a lot of courage.
Yeah.
Imagine if that had gone wrong for her. And Jabin has a working peace with those people, and he's the enemy that's oppressing them. Imagine if she had attempted to kill his commander-in-chief of his army and failed. What would have happened to all of her tribe, all of her people? They would have been eliminated, right? But notice that she doesn't say, well, I better not do this because I don't want to risk them. She understands, as Deborah was saying, this man is not of God. It's obvious she doesn't agree with the fact that her people have made a peace with Jabin. So what that he hasn't attacked us? He's the enemy. How often is that spoken in our Christian communities? Where we have the courage to say to someone, it doesn't matter that that's not attacking you. That's not of God. Just because you've made peace with it does not mean it's okay.
And then you can take advantage of your position, right? Though you're in a peace treaty, then you may be in a place where you don't feel like is a place of God, and people around you have made deals with people, and they're not godly things, but you're in that place, and you have decisions to make of your own, and you're able to then step out, and make the right decisions. Like you have a.
Yeah. And that's a hard thing to do, right? Imagine if you're JL for a moment. Imagine if someone knew what you were doing. I'm sure the people around her knew her character. And they may have been like, was that Sisera? Did he just go into, this is not going to be good.
I was kind of thinking, how could she do that? Like, to have that much courage to do that,
Yeah.
But she shouldn't, but she didn't hesitate. She couldn't have hesitated.
Yeah.
So she was determined and she didn't hesitate. Says a lot. The fact that she drove it through his head to the ground meant she was determined.
Yeah.
Make sure that
That's not an easy thing to do, right?
No.
But I admire her for that. She's like, she's not worried about what others might say, or I'm sure they like the peace. They may have liked the benefit that it brought. And hey, this is a good unity to have, and don't make this bad. She looked and said, no, they're attacking the people of God. This is not of God. So how many of us, what are the things in our lives where God says, hey, you need to grab a tent peg? It doesn't matter if everybody else agrees with it. It's been credited to so many different people. I can't remember who the original was, but the statement that a wrong is wrong even if it's accepted by everyone, and a right is right even if it's accepted by no one, right? JL is that person. She's like, this is wrong. I don't care that everybody else is. So what are those things in our lives that we have to say? It doesn't matter if our cultural norms or our society says this is not a problem, this is okay. No. and I'm gonna take a tent peg and I'm gonna drive it through. This is not going to live in my tent.
One of her husband, Neil, allied with them, and she chose not to be allied with him anymore.
So there's another stance that she's making and taking, right? So as hard as it is to drive a tent peg through someone's head, which is not an easy thing, it's not like she's just, it wasn't just a target of opportunity and she said, oh, I got this, bam. She's risking everything.
Yeah.
And she's going against the heavy norm of her society, of her people, to stand and say, I'm with God. And this isn't right. So not only do I think we all need to have a Deborah in our life, we need to have a JL.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of times, I'll bet you most people in here have testimonies of a spiritual mother or spiritual father who just grabbed you and said, come on, kid, we're going to the altar. We're putting this under the blood right now. We're putting it into this right now. That's grabbing the tent peg, right? Putting it to death. Patrick?
Yeah, I heard in the past that milk is supposed to help you go to sleep better. Could that have been a factor to why she used milk?
No, not at all, because they wouldn't have understood it at that time in that way. I don't want to get into the debates for folks of whether melatonin actually works. But keeping in mind, it's probably goat milk. It's actually a king's drink. It's an honored drink. So I don't think she needed to help him go to sleep. He's been on the run for 24 hours.
Right.
He's been in battle. I'm sure he laid down and was, as soon as he felt at peace, he was out.
Yeah.
And it was good question, but yeah, so for folks that drink milk to go to sleep, I don't mean to like ruin your thing, but there's really actually no evidence that works. Might make you feel more comfortable and lower your blood pressure and help you ease into it a little bit, but on the other hand, in the middle of the night, I wake up and drink a Diet Dew and one swallow the whole can and lay down and go back to sleep. So not sure that that's going to be consistent with milk.
I thought it was really interesting about Barack, the fact, not only did he want Deborah to go with him, I wonder, Deborah told him, certainly I will go with you, but because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours. It will be given to it'll be given to a woman. He seemed to be fine with that. But makes you think that, she's a prophetess, and she says, because of the course you are taking. So makes me think, was that really God's will?
What do you all think?
This was saying a lesson from Joel. Joel's story is often used to illustrate how God can use ordinary people to achieve extraordinary things, and how even seemingly insignificant individuals can play a crucial role in God's plan.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Well, let me throw this out for consideration. Maybe the thing that made Barack great was the fact that he didn't care about cultural norms. He recognized, people could say, well, she's just a woman. He would be like, the Spirit of God is on her.
Right.
Well, she's not allowed. Who are you? The Spirit of God is on her.
Right.
And then a lot of times we read it from our own presuppositions in the negative. Well, because of the path you've chosen, the glory's going to go to a woman. when in fact the Hebrew, it conveys more, because of the path you've chosen. Yes. The recognition is going to go to her. That's how it should be. Because how many men would try to steal that thunder?
They would. I mean, I think it's great that he was.
So when we look at the Hall of Faith, I mean, ultimately, he doesn't end the battle. Jael does. So why would he be in the Hall of Faith if the battle didn't end by his command? Because he knew God's Spirit was on her, and he wouldn't go without that, and he submitted to that. Despite the overwhelming cultural norms that would say no. You don't listen to a woman, she doesn't lead, she doesn't know what she's talking about, she doesn't know how to run an army, no. But he recognized God's hand on her. For me, that's why he's in the Hall of Faith. Because in my mind, the greater battle, it was not Sisera and his army. It was Barak's army, who could have said, I'm not following no woman. I hear that all the time now with people who be like, well, I'm going to go to wherever church God leads me. I wouldn't go to a church where a woman's a pastor. And maybe you feel that way. I don't mean to throw anyone under the bus, but, you know, my thought is, if God has anointed her and called her to that purpose and she's obeying it, why would I not go to that church? Right? Now, it's easy to say that in the 21st century in Western civilization, where people are pushing, you know, for that equality, and rightly so. It was not so easy for Barak. Boy, you talk about going against the grain. That was unheard of for him. And there he is. And notice the beautiful thing is Deborah doesn't lord it over them.
No.
You better recognize. You know, she's just like, okay, thus saith the Lord. Now what you do with it is on you. You know, I love that. And she also, is everybody seated? Everybody watching at home, you might want to pause, take a deep breath. All of these judges that we talk about, with the exception of Samuel, but in the book of Judges, their stories, there's only one of them who does not end up corrupt. Food for thought.
In this Bible, it has focuses on different things. And where it says, when it's talking about Deborah, celebrated willing leaders and willing people in her song of praise for Israel's victory over Jabin and Sisera. Then further down it says, and it's just a focus explanation section. Many people are eager to be in charge, but people of character and ability will step into roles of leadership are rare. God invites us to be his willing leaders. There's such a difference between being a leader and someone who's in charge.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the end of that.
I just added that part. It says there is such a difference between God inviting you to be a leader and a person who wants to be in charge.
Yes.
A person who wants to be in charge, to me, has chosen, I'm going to rule. But with God, he's looking for people who have integrity.
Absolutely.
And yeah,
And I think Deborah demonstrates that par excellence. Not only is she demonstrating her integrity and the fact that she, all glory is going to God, she's not, but she doesn't become corrupt. She's the only judge who isn't corrupted at the end of it all. I think Barak shows great integrity to be able to push against the norms of his culture. But as we read through the Judges, we're going to see that integrity is not always the case. And really, when it comes down to it, as men and women of God, everything centers on integrity. If you don't have integrity, you have nothing. Because that's your character. That's who you really are, right? And that's the whole, I'm the same on Monday as I am on Sunday. It is the attitude of what you see is what you get. The genuine, doesn't mean you're perfect at all. It just means, hey, I'm working on it, and I'm going to be honest and forthright, but it's also, I'm developing that godly character, and I'm doing the work of the Lord for God and in that way. And these are two examples of people who are walking in character, and that's an important thing. All right, let's talk about Gideon, since we're at the halfway point. I noticed that apparently folks online are saying the sound's better now, so that's good. What do we see about old Gideon?
He is a person of doubt. He is a person of, even when God talks to him, he's a person of doubt because God tells him to take one of the goats, and I think to take one of the calves. But then says many Christians look to Gideon as model for making godly decisions. But he tests God over and over. Like when God, when he says, if you really are God, if you really, because he was talked to and he said, my tribe is the least of the tribes and I am the least of my tribe. And so, prove to me. And so he says, okay, I'm going to put this blanket down, and if there's dew on it tomorrow and no dew on the ground, then I'll know you're God. So then the next day there's dew on the blanket, but no dew on the ground. Then he says, well, okay. Yeah, okay, tonight I'm going to put this back on the ground, and I want there to be dew on the ground, but none on the blanket. So that happens too. And then he goes, well, I want there to be dew on the ground and on the blanket, but not under the blanket. I don't think that's right. But anyway, so 3 times he's testing, are you really God? Are you really God? Do you want me? Because he was to defeat the Midianites, who were a really strong tribe. And even when he goes through all that, with God showing him, then he gets, was it 30,000 people? And
Well, let's stop there because you've given us a load to chew on with the fleecing.
yeah,
We'll talk about the 30,000 to 300 here in just a second. What's the deal with the fleecing?
Was to test whether God
yeah.
was with him, but he never asked them to if both the fleece and the ground were wet. It was only the first one was if the fleece was dry and the ground was wet, and then the second time he asked, make the fleece wet and the ground dry.
Okay, so I heard one person say he's testing, are you really God? And then I heard someone say, are you with me?
Yeah.
You think what?
I don't think he was testing to say, are you really God? I think he's saying, I don't understand your direction, nor really what you want me to do if I'm really hearing what I'm hearing. Show me what you're really saying to me.
Okay, so let's read verse 36 there in chapter 6. Then Gideon said to God, if you are going to save Israel through me, as you have spoken.
Yeah.
Behold, I am putting a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece only and is dry on the ground, I will know you will save Israel through me as you have spoken. So in that context, I'm hearing someone say, earlier he was like, okay, wait a minute. It can't possibly be me. I'm the weakest in my family, which is the weakest clan and the weakest tribe.
Yeah.
But didn't Moses do the same thing? He gave God 5 reasons why it can't be him, right? So Gideon is like, okay, you want to save Israel, that's great. I don't see how it's possible for me to be the one. But then he does the fleece. So is he a guy who's just saying, I need to make sure I'm hearing God correctly?
There was a lot of doubt with him. It was a case of doubt. Like I'm not sure if he doubted that God was real, or if he doubted that God would do what he thought he heard.
Okay, yeah. So if I'm doubting that I'm capable of this, is it possible I'm hearing God wrong? Right? What were you going to say, Tom?
I was gonna say, I think that you also have to look a little bit before that, right? Because God says, hey, I want you to tear down these altars. These are the altars of his family, right? That he tears down in the middle of the night. He's willing to be obedient to God, but he wants to make sure he's answering the right call. Like, I want to make sure that
It's not me.
it's not, right? Like, okay, because even to tear down the altars of his family, that's a pretty big deal. But to save Israel for the Midianites, when you have the least of the tribes,
Okay, to
like-
tear down the altars, that's not a hard sell. That's in the Torah.
right?
Don't do this.
Right.
So it's like, okay, I don't really need to fleece God on that. It's like saying, I wonder if God's against murder. I think he's pretty clear on that.
Right. So,
We've got that, right?
yeah.
And so he tears it down. And I love his dad's response. Well, if Baal's such a great God, let him defend himself, you know?
Yeah.
What a great truth. But me deliver Israel, that's a whole nother thing, right?
That's a whole nother call. That's a whole nother, that's not, me following your laws is one thing, and me believing that you're God and that your ways are right are one thing, but delivering Israel, me?
You know, he's focusing along his weaknesses and his limitations.
Like much afraid.
Yeah.
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 Looking at her.
Well, another interesting correlation there
Yeah,
with
but
our
you
book
could
study.
also say, I mean, he's done some great things so far. Pride could come into play really there for him too. Gideon could become very prideful, and I think he's trying not to be prideful. He's trying to be humble and say, God, I'm humbling myself. I want, you said, but I don't want to step out when it's really not you.
Yeah, I think that's the heart of it, that what he's demonstrating there is humility. He doesn't see it possible that it could be him, but he's hearing from God. And he's like, okay, instead of standing up, I'm the chosen of God, he's like, I better make sure, I need to know that I'm hearing from you right.
Yeah.
I'm going to obey, but I don't want to miss it. I have people often ask, well, do you think it's okay to fleece? And I've heard people preach that, oh, that shows a lack of faith. I don't think it, I'm just telling you how I feel. I don't think it shows a lack of faith. Here's what I know. A lot of times when I'm trying to find the direction of God, okay, we'll know his voice. There's times the Holy Spirit's like there, and you're like, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of times you hear all of these different voices that are chiming in
Yeah.
and trying to drown out God's voice.
Yeah.
And then you may hear God say something and you go, really? Really? And I got to know that I'm hearing God clearly. And that's where you use a fleece. And Gideon does that. And he goes to the second time, God, don't hold it against me. Let me do this one more time. I commend him for that. He wants to make sure he's hearing from God. He's going to act upon it, but if I'm going to act upon it, I want to make sure I'm hearing right. I kind of like that attitude.
And you don't see God get mad.
No.
God doesn't.
He continues.
He shows him. He says, okay.
I gotta say, I'm really glad we had this talk because it was a long time ago when I studied it, and it was one of the first ones that I studied. And I don't know what part got into my head that he was testing God, which meant that he didn't have faith. But in listening to y'all and then looking at this again with different eyes and ears, I can see it right here as plain as day. Not the way that I was thinking.
So I would also say that the first test was when the angel of the Lord appeared to him and he asked him, "Show me a sign of who that is," but the Lord speaking to me. And he placed gave him that offering of the bread and the
Goat.
goat, and the angel used the tip of his staff to touch the bread and the meat, and it flamed up and it disappeared. And that's when Gideon exclaimed, "Oh, I'm doomed because I saw the Lord face to face." So that was like the first, test.
I thought that was super cool too, because immediately I thought Gideon's having communion with God.
Yeah.
He's brought the lamb and he's brought the bread. He's having communion with God. I thought that was really cool.
And once again, if I'm Gideon, not only because I'm the least in my tribe, which is the least, et cetera, they're being oppressed by Midian, which that word means strife. They have altars to Baal all over the place. I would probably be thinking, if God's going to pick a deliverer, it probably is not from us, because we're so far from God at this point. I mean, Jael, her folks, her tribe, or at least her people, have made a peace treaty with the enemy.
Yeah.
This group has their gods in the middle of their cities and are worshiping it. So I'm not thinking, if I'm Gideon, God's not going to come knocking on our door to say, "Hey, it's time to end this stuff." He's probably going to be like, "You're going to get wiped out because you partnered with them." Right? But then what does he say? Lay the sacrifice on. And what's the thing that Gideon does right after that? He knocks down the altars. Because he realizes it is God, and God is coming here. That's pretty cool, you know? All right, so with the time we have left, we've already talked about the ibex that we got a chance to see. There was somewhere else we went to the spring there, which is still flowing. Alan dipped down and started drinking out of it. So what's the deal? The 30,000 to 10,000 to 300. What's going on there?
It was to reduce. That's how much he had. That was like his army, and it had to be reduced because there was too many of them.
Why has anyone in history ever said my army's too big?
No.
No.
Especially when the enemy's army's bigger.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, if you're Gideon and you're like, "There's no way I could be, okay, I got to fleece this." You say it is me? All right, God, well, what do we got? We've got 30,000 soldiers. That's a good start. And God says, "Well,
No,
wait a
too
minute."
Too many.
Now, imagine, first of all, he says, you get a cut down to a third. I mean, imagine you were going up against this army and God said, "Okay, I need you to drop 2/3 of what you got." That's a big cut. All right, God, well, we cut 2/3, so here we go. And God says, "Well, actually." So think about it. He's going from 30,000 to 300. Any mathematicians, what's that percentage? 1%. Why did God do that?
To prove a point,
What point?
that God was going to win the war.
Yeah.
Not Gideon, not the men. There's to be no question that God was
Yeah,
the one that won.
that God won the battle.
Because people would say, you know, with 30,000, oh, well, yeah, I can see that.
We did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When hopefully with only 300, we would say, not even Gideon did it. God did it.
Right.
Yeah.
But of course, what do the people say?
Yeah, getting in.
Yay, Gideon.
Gideon.
Right.
Okay. So there's been much discussion since that day on the whole selection process and the drinking of the water. What are you all thinking on that? Why did God use that? What was God signifying? Who are the ones that God says, those are your soldiers? What do they do?
Like a dog.
Yeah.
Like a dog.
So there's a group that basically slams their face into that cool water. Now remember, you're walking great distances. It's hot. And as some folks here have been there, you see it is crystal clear, cold water coming out of the mountain. What would most people do?
Lay down in it. That's what I would do.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. You know, if you go out to the beach or you're out having a great day with the family and it's a really hot day and you reach into the cooler and there's that drink that's in a can and it's ice cold and you grab that tea or that soda or whatever, you don't go, right? What do most of us do? You've been out playing volleyball. You've been out running, chasing the grandkids and stuff. You walk over, get that drink, you, right? You're squeezing it to get everything out of it. So they slam their face into the water. They're getting a drink. But then there's another group. What do?
They kneel down and they scoop it to their face.
They scoop it to their face. What's the difference? Why would God use that to signify something?
When you're skipping it up, you can still see out.
So when you're scooping it up, you can still see out. That's what we're at war, right?
They're alert.
They're alert. They're looking at the ones who are running up. Okay, I understand they're thirsty. They're slamming their face into the water and drinking. What is their priority? Themselves. But the ones who are, if you're drinking like that, what are you doing? You're looking for the enemy. You're looking out for everyone else. And
You're watching your buddy.
you're watching battle buddies, right? And you have a free hand to get your sword. Now, if you're slamming your face down, remember where we were, how it was kind of like in a sunken thing. You're laying prone, right? Now, if the enemy comes, the first thing you got to do is get up, and by then you're done.
Those rocks are slippery.
They were slippery, weren't they? But if you're crouched down on your feet and you're drinking like this, you're automatically up. Your hands are free to grab your weapon, to defend, right? That's a pretty interesting thought about the soldier that God chooses, the Christian warrior that God chooses, the one who understands, yeah, I'm thirsty, but hey, there's water, and there's also an enemy. And I've got to put others ahead of myself sometimes. I'll get enough water eventually, but right now, I got to make sure these folks are safe. I'm not faulting them for drinking the way that they are. I'm just making sure that they're safe. God says, yeah, that's the one I want. It's a servant mindset, right? It is a spiritual warfare awareness. There is a roaring lion seeking to devour. So I'm always vigilant, as Peter says. Be sober, be vigilant, right? If you were on, if you know, you were in a plane that went down and you're in the safari areas and there's all manner of wild creature, you better stay on your toes if you're in the area of a lion, because you're not going to see that lion that's watching you, right? You got to be ready when it attacks to respond. That's what these guys are doing.
Kind of makes me think too of the Beatitudes and where it says, you know, the last shall be first. Because for the men that were just diving in, they were anxious and they were fast to get theirs, you know, and the guy that is lapping it up, it took a little more effort and time to get it. So they were last at getting the water, you know, and they were more
But they were
concerned.
God's first choice.
But they were
That's a
God's
great,
first
yeah, it's a
choice.
great connection. I like that. And even Jesus says, I have not come to be served, but to serve. It's that understanding of others focused, right? I like that. So he cuts it down to 300. That's got to be encouraging, right?
If you're one of the 300, you kind of sweating bullets at that point.
You're like, why did I slam my face in the water?
Probably should have lapped up that water.
But also at that time, how many times has God shown? And hopefully they realize, okay, God's with us. And I don't know. It's God uses the most unlikely people in unlikely circumstances to do the greatest things. So you got 1%. I mean, who would have thought a shepherd boy? Goliath was offended that he took the battlefield, right? How about later on when they say, okay, well, who's going to lead the battle? And God says, send the Levites in first. The praise team. Well, wait a minute. We just sing, right? Hold on. But the praise sends the enemy into disarray because God shows up. He inhabits that praise. How many times does that happen in Scripture? But what does that mean for us? You know, as we develop that others-focused servant mentality, God says, I can use that one. Look at the humility Gideon had. God said, I can use that one. And he elected them to do a great work. What's the surest way of making sure you're not going to be elected to do a great work? Your desire to do a great work. In our society, that's key, right? I volunteer. I'm first in the line. I'm your man. I'm your woman. I'm the one, right? I got this. I can handle this. You can count on me, right? And then I'm going to put it on my resume. What?
And put it on Facebook.
And put it on, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh, you touched a nerve with me there. Here I am at the soup kitchen helping out, you know. I'm so humble. Ugh.
Yeah.
But the one that's others focused. God says I can use that one because not only will they do it, will they rely on me in humility, God's going to get the glory. And it's not that he's a glory hound. It's that when we get the glory, well, what happens to Gideon?
We get corrupted.
He gets corrupted. And that's the sad reality. All of a sudden we begin to believe our own press. Hey, yeah. You know, it's kind of odd when you think about Gideon walking around going, yeah, that's right. You know, recognize me and my kids, you know. Remember what we did? Well, wait a minute. What did you do? Last time I looked, the whole time you were telling God, I'm not sure that I'm hearing you right. I'm not able to do this. So wasn't it God all along? There's an old song that we used to sing, look what the Lord has done. Mm-hmm. That's a good attitude for us to live by, right? Look what the Lord has done. It's nothing that we've done. We were just blessed to be invited to partner with him. but it's what the Lord has done. Any other thoughts on Gideon?
About the, the ephod, the vest,
Mm-hmm.
when he told the Israelites to, when he collected their earrings, and then he made an ephod out of it, and that vest became an object of idolatry. So once they did that, they started worshiping it, and then it says that then Gideon's son Joash returned home. He had 70 sons born to him, for he had many wives. He had a concubine in Shechem who gave birth to a son whom he named Abimelech. And then Gideon died when he was old, and he was buried in the grave of his father Joash at Ophrah in the land of the clan of Abiezer. So after after the war, after that battle with the Midianites, he made ephod, I guess, to commemorate his, their victory.
Well, did he have any right to make an ephod? Anybody know what tribe? I don't know why a lot of people say Benjamin. He was not a Benjamite. Does anyone know the tribe that Gideon was from? Manasseh. The half tribe of Manasseh. So is he authorized? Who can tell me what an ephod is?
It's a vest, it's a ceremonial vest that the Levites wore. It's a priestly.
It's a priestly vest. It's a priestly garment.
Different tribes.
Is he a priest? Does he take on the role in some measure? Yeah, he made an ephod. He does. Ironic, since he's the one who tore down the altars to Baal. And then he establishes himself in their place. To a degree. That's why we have to sing, "Look what the Lord has done." And always remember, to God be the glory, right? All right, how about next week? Do you want to fast forward to Judges 14? Some crazy cat named Samson, or do you feel like we've covered Samson pretty well in the past? She don't like Samson? I'm not a big fan of
No,
Samson.
we don't meet him in here.
Well, when we come out of Judges, you've got Ruth.
Oh, yeah, we like
That's
Ruth.
4 chapters. We can talk a whole lot about Ruth.
Yeah, we talked about Ruth. I like Ruth.
The Goel and the kinsman redeemer and the sheaves in the field and all that good stuff. Maybe even get into a little prophetic end time stuff, which is all contained in the book of Ruth. Cool? All right. We're going to read the entire book of Ruth. As I said, it's 4 chapters. But really, the heart of it is in the first 2, little bit in the 3rd. So really kind of look on that real heavy. But we will venture into all of them. Okay. So for those watching online, blessing to have you all. Cat Matt jumped in there. Pastor Crystal jumped in there. Jen said, hi, miss you all. So there are a bunch of folks that were coming in there. If you'd like to join us next week, we're going to be talking about the book of Ruth. And you can bring your insights. Just type them in, and we'll be reading them as we go along. And we'll see what God has in store. Amen? Amen. Awesome. Be blessed. And we'll look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Grace to all watching. Ooh.